Just to introduce you quickly, so you write under a pen name. So your actual author name is Eva Carmichael.
Yes,
So,
it's a family name, yes.
okay, but I'm going to call you Anne. Is that all right?
That's fine.
So thank you for joining us. The point of these interviews is to talk about your writing right here on Teesside, the books that you've published, how you write, where your writing comes from, and then also the situation within the last year, how things have changed with the COVID lockdown situation and how that's affected you and whatnot. So
Right, okay.
introduce your books. So you write gritty crime novels.
Yes, I just completed my second one. I'm waiting for that from the printers. It's a follow-on to the first one. My first one was Bad Blood Rising, which is here. That came out just before lockdown, actually, so it was being promoted during lockdown, which was difficult. And my second one was actually written in lockdown. So that was quite difficult writing without the support of fellow writers and writing groups that I belong to. So it's quite lonely, really, writing that one, but it's fine.
Let's go back to how did you start writing and where did your first novel come from? Sort of how did you get into writing?
Well, I think like a lot of writers, as a child, I enjoyed doing school essays. I was always sort of the top in the school essay department, encouraged to write. But it wasn't until I actually came to live in the Northeast. We retired, my husband and I retired here 4 years ago. And all the busy things I was involved with before had disappeared. I was on the council and volunteer with the library, various other things. And although I did creative writing classes, the short stories, I ran one of those actually in West Yorkshire. It wasn't until I actually came up to the Northeast that I started to think seriously about writing. Years ago, my background's sort of legal. I was a legal PA for various solicitors, but I had worked for the police for several years as well. So I'd always got this sort of background of policing and legal. That's what interested me. And one day I was on the train station on my way home, and the trains were all delayed. I think that they were refurbing Leeds Station, so everything was sort of on hold. So I went into the pub, like you do, to wait for my train, and I got talking to this very attractive woman, very eloquent, very articulate. And at the end of our conversation, she was going to Manchester, and she asked me where I worked, and I told her. And I said, "What about you, Carmel? Where do you work?" "Oh, I'm an escort, darling," she said, "just like you do." And off she went. And I saw her a few days later. And I think as a writer, you always get that little conversation that sparks an idea. And I thought, oh, I must find out about this. Not that I was thinking of joining her, you understand, but just the and we got talking, and we became friends. We had this sort of strange friendship, I suppose. Really, we had lunch a couple of times, and she introduced me to a couple of her friends, and it was fascinating. The after hours industry. You go home at 6 o'clock, you close your door and you watch your telly, have your dinner, and that's it, and your day's finished. But there's a whole world out there that come to life after 6 o'clock, and that's what her world was all about. And it was really fascinating. She was very sort of high class escort, I think. And her life experiences were fantastic. And then talking to some of the girls that she introduced me to over the few weeks that I knew her. And it was just really out of curiosity, but I think at the back of my mind was this idea of having these girls as a backdrop, if you like, for a crime story. So when I came up here and I joined the writing group with the U3A, the novel writing, I just remembered these conversations and things that I've seen and heard. And of course, you have imagination as well, and put them all together. And before I knew it, Bad Blood Rising was sort of writing itself. It was the easiest book to write. There was never, ever a period where I had to stop and think about it. There were so many ideas coming, and voices. Oh God, I sound like I'm hearing voices, but you actually get into the character. You get to know the characters, and you think, how would they react in this certain situation? And when you do that, the book writes itself, really. And that's what's happened, both the first one and, as I said, the second one was more difficult because I didn't have the encouragement and advice from other writers, which I'd had with the first book. It was written in my bedroom, where I'm now, in a little alcove, and I did feel a little bit isolated. But it's done now, and it's out there, and hopefully future books I'll be back, buzzing with my friends.
So so your first book came out before lockdown, but
It
then
was, yeah, sorry, it was the very end of 2019 when it came out.
so you'd only just launched into promoting it and getting it out and about when lockdown happened. But
That's right.
you actually were really fortunate. So
Well, writing to me has never been about making money. I think if you say I'm going to write a book and I'm going to make a fortune, I think you're going to be very, very disappointed. It's never ever been about money. It's just been about the acknowledgement that you can write a book and tell a story, and people would enjoy what the story that you've told. And so I decided to promote my book. I'd got them in bookshops, but of course bookshops then started closing down, and it was all very awkward. But the markets were open, and my friend Billy, who runs the market, I had a word with him and said, could I rent a stall? He said, oh, don't worry, you can have one. He said, so he gave me a couple of tables and a gazebo,
this is
and
a red car.
in the Red Car Town Centre, yes. And of course it was quite nice. We had some really quite nice weather, if you can remember that far back in the summer. Books don't do very well in wind and rain, I found, but when it's reasonably warm and sunny, it's lovely. And I sold, I think, about 150 in the 3 weeks for the 4 occasions that I was out there. Um, and I had so many fantastic emails from people, and people coming up to me that had bought it the week before. Oh, I couldn't put it down. I loved it. And it encourages you, because you never really know. You would think you've written a good book. And of course, your friends and family are going to say, oh, it's very good. But it's when a stranger comes up to you and said, oh, that book, I couldn't put it down. And then you get that warm buzz. So, as I said, I started selling my books on the market. And my plan was, I got all the different markets in the area in the northeast, and my plan was on a Monday I'd go here, and on a Tuesday I would go there, and promote my books. But of course, that's I should be doing that now, but that can't happen. But it will in the spring. It's just sort of putting it on hold, really. So I'm basically relying on Amazon. And advertising. I haven't got my book back yet, but once I've got my book back, then I'll start advertising it properly and see where we go from there.
Yeah, but you really are an inspiration. You're one of my stories that I tell people about. You sometimes have to just pick up your box of books and get out there with it and go and find your audience.
Of course you do. And I think when you I mean, I'm not knocking bookshops. They're there, and they do a very good job and everything else, but it is a little bit impersonal, really. And if I put my book on a shelf in a bookshop, that book is one of thousands, and people might look at it and be, I think it's a bit like Marmite. The book cover, you either love it or it puts you off. Excuse me. So you've got all that competition there as well. So you've got to make your name in order to get your book out there for people to know. Whereas when you haven't got a name, you just have to rely on passing trade, really. And that's what I did on the market. And and I've got people, in fact, just this week I've had a couple of emails. So when's your new book coming? You promised at Christmas. Excuse me.
As well, there's an element that a bookshop or people, or even online, you're trying to sell your book to people who've already decided they want to go and buy a book, and they're looking for which book to buy. What you hit upon in the market was that it was normal people going about their business, buying this, that, and the other, and they suddenly came across a table with a local author selling a book that you've written, and it's that chance to actually speak to it and be sort of taken by surprise, like, oh my goodness, this book's been written by someone right here in Redcar, and it looks great, it reads brilliantly, and they can speak to you about it.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
also
I mean,
people who might not have gone, they wouldn't have set out that day thinking, oh, I'm going to go and buy a book today.
no.
but the fact that they did, and they managed, you know, they had a chance to speak to you, the person who'd actually written it, I think is amazing. And you really built on that by going back and keeping at it.
Yes,
And
and I'm looking forward when we can go out to play again, when we're out of our
yeah,
box. I'm
yeah,
looking forward to continuing, and of course now I've got I'll have a second book by then. So it's just, it's all looking good. It's all looking good. It's all looking good.
brilliant. There was one day I got a call from you saying you needed more books because you'd sold out. And we
Mhm.
were bringing a box of books to Redcar, and as we were stood talking at your front door, socially distanced, weren't we? Because it was in the middle of the whole
Mhm.
lockdown thing. Your post lady walked past, and she veered across the road, and she came and she shouted across to us, said, "I loved your book."
Jeanette, yes, yes,
And
yes, she.
it's getting that kind of feedback from people who, you know, you wouldn't normally be expecting to sell your books to, but to have
Exactly, and I get stopped in this, well, not the supermarket, but in some of the shops in town with people that have bought my book, and they come up and say how much they've enjoyed it and when's the second one out. So you are getting a name out there, you know. I mean, I know it's only a very small pond at the moment, but you know the world's there to grow into, really.
yeah, definitely.
Well,
You've mentioned sort of briefly the effect of the COVID lockdown situation. So apart from the getting out and selling your first book, you did sort of so you've written a whole book in lockdown.
a whole book in lockdown, yes, without any sort of help or encouragement from anywhere. You know, it's just been in solitude, really. So,
Yeah.
but it's good. I'm pleased with it. I'm pleased with it.
What we've found is our writers have kind of split into people who thought they would do loads because they had lots of time and have actually not done very much at all because of this, that, and the other going on.
Mhm.
So you're in the camp definitely of you had a year to write a book and you've
I
squirreled
love
yourself away
writing.
and done
I
it.
love writing. I try to write every single day, and some days you don't feel like it. But even if it's rubbish, I will always come up and do at least a couple of paragraphs or half a chapter or something. I might change it the next day, but I think you've always got to get into that habit of sitting down and writing. And you know, it's not something. I mean, some of my friends who are writers will say, "Oh, I haven't touched my book in, you know, in 3 weeks. I can't be bothered." I couldn't do that. I've got to do something every single day, and it's almost like a compulsion. I think, like a jogger would go out, and they go out in all weathers because it's something they've got to do it. And it's the same with writing. It's just that drive, I think, you know. And yeah. So, and when you get there's no better feeling than getting a book in your hand and saying, "I wrote this. You know, I've created this. Everyone in there is from my mind, really, from, you know, my imagination." And it's a wonderful feeling. I absolutely. I'm really proud of myself, actually, for achieving that.
Do,
You know,
do you feel like you are part of a sort of a writing community here in Teesside?
Um, I was with the Scriveners, which is a writing group, and of course I was with Six Element and meetings there, and I was with the U3A novel writing. So yes, I've had, you know, there are organisations that you can go to, but I like being on my own. Sounds terrible, but I do like being on my own to an extent, because I just go into a world of, you know, where these characters just come to life in my head, and you can't really share that with other people. You've got to be, you know, it's a private thing. And yeah, I was asked, actually, last time I was out just before Christmas, but the last time the markets were allowed open, and I sold a dozen or so that day. It wasn't very busy uptown, and one lady came up to me and said, "Was this your line of business then?" I mean, as you can see, it's a prostitute on the front cover. You know, was this like your line of business? I said, no. No, the Catholic Church did too good a job on me, I'm afraid.
But this is the brilliant thing about writing fiction is you go into whichever world you want to go. And
Exactly, exactly. And when you think about characters, when I'm thinking about introducing a new character, before I put pen to paper, you know, go on the board, I live in that person's head for a while. Imagine looking at it from his viewpoint, and I found that it helps so much, because if you try and write everything with your morals and your sort of line, it just wouldn't work. You know, people have different moral compasses, don't they? And you've got to sort of stretch it a little bit sometimes.
Brilliant. That's been great. We're about out of time. So thank you
Right.
very much for joining us. It's been lovely talking, and good luck with the second book. And hopefully, well, like you say, when we are let out and about,
That's out of my
you
box.
again soon.
It won't be long now. It won't be long now.
Brilliant. Well, have fun with the second book.
All
And
right. Thank you.
take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye for now.
Bye.